here we are first thing this morning, and you're getting it again. But there's some things I want to point out to you all, just in case you haven't been with us before, or maybe you weren't on a tour where we did point it out. Off to the right front of the bus, up on this high ground, is Mount Hebron Cemetery. You can see it there. In the back part of that cemetery is a separate cemetery. It's the Confederate Cemetery, and it is laid out in an extremely picturesque way. There are a lot of Confederate veterans from numerous Confederate states that are buried there, who died in the performance of their duty in the battles here around Winchester, also in the hospitals here. As we're going out National Avenue, this is the old Berryville Pike, which is leading from Berryville, obviously, to Winchester. It's the main east-west route into Winchester at the time of the war. Still is today, actually. And off to the right here, you're going to see in just a moment a stone wall. If we slow down a little bit as we're going past it, this is the Winchester National Cemetery. This is a very, very early national cemetery. It's one of the earliest in the national cemetery system. And the monuments that are in this cemetery are placed by veterans, and most of them are related to the Battle of 3rd Winchester. This is battlefield ground here. At the time that the monuments were being placed here, this was the only preserved piece of ground. And so when the veterans came back here, they placed their monuments there, with the exception of the Vermont monument, which was placed out here, out where the Vermonters actually fought during the battle. And we come back and we're giving you a 3rd Winchester tour. We'll point that out to you. What we're going to be doing today is we're going up into the Panhandle of West Virginia. We're going to go all the way almost to the Potomac River today, and we're going to talk about that time period from when Sheridan takes command of the newly formed, and that's important, we're going to get into that in a second, the newly formed Army of the Shenandoah, all the way through the month of August, basically the month of August. We're going to go a little bit into maybe the first few days of September. Yesterday, or I should say Thursday, really what we were covering were the maneuvers in July. That's really what we were covering. And to kind of recap a little bit about that and make sure you remember where we are in the progression of our story here, you've had a lot of change and a lot of upheaval in the high command of the Union Army at this point, and there's more to come. You have David Hunter, who is now, if you remember, arrived back into the theater of operations from his disastrous march, which that talk yesterday was great. Wasn't that great? I've seen a lot of nodding heads. So that gives you a better picture now, as we're talking about Hunter, about, what his troops have just gone through, and they're just now starting to filter back in. In early July 11th is when they're starting, the vanguard of that return is starting to arrive back in Harper's Ferry. So Hunter really is not in good standing at this point, but he's very highly respected. He outranks many of the other options for Army command. And so Lincoln and Grant are both going to handle him with kid gloves. So as you get into the last days of July, you now suffered through the burning of Chambersburg. You've had that massive, not only was it a disaster for the people of Chambersburg, but it was a massive public relations disaster for Abraham Lincoln. It had really no military significance at all. But it really was a huge disaster for Lincoln as he continues to look towards November. He's looking towards the election, and it's really not good for his re-election campaign to have northern cities being burned to the ground, at least large portions of the city being burned to the ground by just roving and uncontested Confederate troops. So that is a disaster. Hunter needs to be replaced. What Grant is going to do, and again, he's doing this under the advice and direction of Abraham Lincoln, is he's not going to relieve Hunter of command. He is going to say that Hunter needs to establish his headquarters at a place convenient for him, and that he's going to run the department. Hunter is going to be in charge of this newly forming department, but because because we know you have a lot on you and there is a tremendous amount of logistical paperwork that you need to be handling, I think what we're going to do is we're going to put Phil Sheridan in charge of the troops in the field. Just in the field, you're still in command. This is the type of approach that they're taking with Hunter. Now they're going to give Hunter that information at Monocacy Junction. Grant's actually going to come out and meet with Hunter at Monocacy Junction. And Hunter might not have been really good in Lynchburg, but he can see the writing on the wall. He understands what's happening, and he will resign, from that post. And there's a whole bunch of other things that go on with Hunter later, but suffice it to say that it kind of works out perfectly for Grant, because now Phil Sheridan is going to be put in command of the department. Now let's talk about that for a second. We focus on Phil Sheridan and his duties here in the Valley and what he's facing here in the Valley. That's what we've been talking about on this tour. We always think about him as the author and finisher of the 1864 Valley Campaign. But it's important to remember, especially when you're assessing the man, that his responsibilities stretched from Baltimore to the Ohio River, all through the Allegheny Mountains of West Virginia, that main B&O supply route coming out of Washington, D.C., all the way out to Wheeling, West Virginia, and Parkersburg, West Virginia, Cumberland, Maryland, the area just south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So not only is he handling what's going on here in the field, in the Valley, but his department is massive. And so he's got a lot going on behind the scenes that involve protecting those rail routes, protecting the C&O Canal was still somewhat operable at that point, and he's got railroad bridges, railroad tunnels, cuts and fills that all have to be protected in a very remote and rugged area. So he has a lot going on that we don't usually assess or figure in when we're talking about the Valley Campaign. When he takes command, it is a brand new command. They're going to take 4 separate military departments, all smaller than this one, and they're going to put them together. They're going to form the Army of the Shenandoah, and the Army of the Shenandoah is not going to be birthed overnight. There's going to be some logistics involved in bringing that army together, so that when Sheridan arrives in Harper's Ferry, and he arrives a few days after the lead elements start arriving in Harper's Ferry, but as he's starting to consolidate his troops in Harper's Ferry, he's got to bring an army together that has not served together in total ever before. He's got to shake out a new command structure. He has subordinates who may have qualified for his position, and subordinates who think they maybe should have had his position. So he's got those personality and command structure issues that he's working through. He also does not have full strength immediately upon arriving in the Valley. And remember, even though it's Phil Sheridan, a man who has proven military prowess in his exploits in the West, I mean, think about Missionary Ridge alone. Missionary Ridge was thought to be impenetrable. Who penetrated it? Phil Sheridan did. Sheridan was really somebody that Grant had his eye on, because Sheridan did well in the field. I mean, he's not one of these fellas who comes out of nowhere, was unexpected to do, it was not expected for him to do anything amazing. Grant really did have good cause to think that Phil Sheridan was exactly the man that he needed. So Phil Sheridan is coming here with military experience, but he's never had an independent command like this one. And he's not coming, he's got the full confidence of Ulysses S. Grant, but he does not have the full confidence of Stanton or Lincoln. And Lincoln will meet with Sheridan before he comes out here to Harper's Ferry, and Lincoln will basically tell him as such. Lincoln does not mince any words, and he, paraphrasing here, says, Grant wants you, so I'm going to go along with it, but I'm really not expecting much. Please do well. It really was not it was warm and it was affable, but Lincoln did not leave it to doubt as to whether or not he thought that Sheridan should have been chosen. But to Lincoln's credit, he allows Grant to do that. Now Grant is looking at some things, more than likely, that we see reflected in the common soldier's accounts of Philip Sheridan. Philip Sheridan was about my height. He was the weight that I am supposed to be. He was about 120 pounds, soaking wet. He was described by some as a banty rooster. I think Abraham Lincoln said that he was an oddly built man who could scratch his knees without bending over because his arms were so long. He was very... Oh, head and no neck. Yeah, there's a lot of quotes about his appearance. We do know from personal accounts of close associates of Sheridan that Sheridan was self-conscious, not about his height or the length of his arms. He was self-conscious about... He apparently had a slightly peaked head. That his head he thought his head was shaped strangely, and so he will actually be very conscious of that when he's getting images taken, and it's something that his close friends talked about. Never seen anything that said that he was self-conscious about anything else that Abraham Lincoln pointed out, but he was self-conscious about the shape of his own head. Now, he had some personality traits that almost got in the way of us ever even talking about him. His military career was almost ended before it began because of his quick and very short temper, which he displayed at West Point. He was just quick to get upset, and it didn't take much to do that. What's interesting about that is, before reading a good bit about him in recent years, I always thought that he was just a kind of a temperamental, biting guy because you always hear about his temper. That is not the case at all. He's described, even during this period of when he's putting his army together here in Harper's Ferry, he's described as being very affable, described as being almost cheerful about his work. It was said by his subordinates that he went about his duties as if he was working for himself, meaning, as if he owned the business and it was up to him to get it done. He's described as working almost around the clock when he takes control of this army. The other thing that he is described as being very detail-oriented. He does the same thing that Jackson does when Jackson takes his first independent command at Harper's Ferry, interestingly enough, and really demands good maps. And Sheridan, you think of Jackson spending time with Hotchkiss, and that's part of Jackson's story. That's part of what we often talk about with Jackson, that part of Jackson's genius was bringing Hotchkiss in and really knowing the landscape, every cow path and farm road, down to the detail, and that gives him an edge over his opponents. Sheridan takes that same approach. We don't talk about that quite as much with Sheridan. When Sheridan gets to Harper's Ferry, he spends a lot of time poring over maps and apparently retaining a great amount of detail himself. So he had a mind and an eye for maps, and he's going to apply that when he gets here. The other thing he's going to do is he's going to start to really rely on a friend of his who is not the ranking subordinate, but will become his probably closest confidant and really his strategic partner, and that's George Crook. And George Crook, who we've been talking about, George Crook is in charge of the Army of West Virginia, and Crook and Sheridan, while they're in the valley, have an extremely close relationship. They are, like I said, strategic partners. You get the very real sense that they like each other's company, and Sheridan will trust Crook, and Crook will trust Sheridan. We try to apply oftentimes that gap, that gulf of disagreement that comes to define their relationship, but that does not come until after they're here in the valley. Now, it does get conflated with what goes on here in the valley and confused with what goes on here in the valley, because of what Sheridan and Crook will say, what will be in their memoirs, and what about the Valley in hindsight. They're complaining about each other in the Valley in hindsight. While they're here, for the most part, their relationship is very strong, and I don't just say that as a matter of human interest. I say that because that will figure very strongly and very prominently into what is going to happen in the Valley over the next several weeks of the time period in late 1864. So Crook, he's going to rely on Crook, and that's going to begin very early. The other thing that we know that Sheridan is doing when he takes command and he's consolidating this new army is that he is going to start to display some of that really good judgment very early. He's going to push elements out every direction, every road, to try to make sure that he's really staying on top of an understanding of where Jubal Early is. Why am I saying that? That is not always the case in the Shenandoah Valley with Union High Command. In 61, 62, 63, one of the problems that really displays itself is a lack of attention by Union High Command to what their opponent's doing. They make a lot of assumptions in 61, 62, 63. Sheridan's not going to do that. He's going to not assume anything. He's going to try to verify and be alerted early. These things that you would think would be just second nature to a military commander. The Union Army, the Union High Command fumbled that ball in every year of the war thus far. Sheridan, right out of the gate, is going to make efforts not to make those same mistakes. So that's a little bit about what's going on with Sheridan up in Harper's Ferry at the very, very beginning of August. Now, just to kind of orient you, you look behind me, you're looking down the valley, that's northward, generally northward, over to the right of the bus, that's the Blue Ridge Mountain over there where the cloud bank is, not very far that direction. And we're bearing westward now, and what we're going to do is we're going to head over to Summit Point. Now, the reason we're heading to Summit Point is we're going to leap ahead in our story a little bit and talk about the advance of Anderson and Anderson's troops. Now, we got to get Anderson here. Why is Anderson here? What is the buildup that leads to Anderson being sent out here by Lee? If you go back to about the same time that Grant is trying to figure out what's going on with his newly forming army, in Richmond, Robert E. Lee meets with President Jefferson Davis and General Richard Anderson. They are going to meet at the Confederate White House, and in that meeting, a plan is going to be developed that is going to result in Anderson with Kershaw's infantry division and two elements of cavalry, with the ranking cavalry commander being Fitz Lee, and a little bit of artillery. And they are going to be ordered to start to march towards Culpeper, and from Culpeper, they are supposed to operate on the eastern side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The reason that is happening is that Lee is aware of this reorganization of the Union Army. He knows that Crook and the Army of West Virginia and Hunter are arriving back in the northernmost part of the Shenandoah Valley. He's aware of all of that. And he's also aware that Grant is in command, that Grant is, he has some reason to believe that Grant is going to be continuing to press out here in this region. And so Early has told him that, that reinforcements may be something that could be very useful. What Lee and Early decide is that Anderson is going to operate on the east side of the Blue Ridge Mountains, not come here and directly serve with Early. That's not the first plan. That's what's going to happen, but that's not the first plan of attack. What they want to do is they want to force Sheridan to have to divide his attention between Early and and Anderson. What he wants, what Lee wants, and what Jefferson Davis approves is he wants Anderson to appear to threaten Northern Virginia. He wants Anderson to move more towards Leesburg, more towards the crossing points of the Potomac in that area. This raid that Early has just successfully carried out has been very, very successful at keeping the Union guessing, and it has divided and pulled troops away from what Lee's facing in Petersburg, and it's also divided those troops into smaller units as they have tried to figure out what Early was going to do next. They want to further that. They want to exploit that advantage, and so they want to do more of that. So they want to send Anderson into Northern Virginia to operate there. He's supposed to keep Kershaw within distance of Gordonsville and Culpeper, perhaps move them as far north as Leesburg to seem to feign to threaten, maybe to move towards Harper's Ferry, cross the Potomac somewhere in that area, or maybe go back over towards White's Ferry and the other crossings outside of Leesburg. So they want to make sure that Kershaw is a threat, but that Kershaw doesn't get cut off. The other thing that they're going to do is they want to take both cavalry commands, put them under the command of Fitz Lee, and do cavalry raids further to the east, and really operate in that Piedmont area off to the right of the bus here, out over the Blue Ridge. What the idea is if that threat seems significant enough, it's going to force Sheridan to have to divide his troops, maybe then providing the opportunity for Early to fall upon a part of Sheridan and destroy that part, and thus possibly regain an advantage out here. That's the plan. What's going to happen in the very early weeks of, or the very early days of August, is that Early himself is going to be way up near Williamsport, Shepherdstown, and his army is going to be basically centered around Bunker Hill and up in that part of the valley. And in fact, the day that Sheridan takes command of the army, Early is having dinner in Sharpsburg. So he's over in Maryland having dinner in Sharpsburg. So he's operating very close to the Potomac. When Sheridan starts to push some of his probing elements up the valley, through Charlestown, out towards Leetown and Martinsburg, Early is going to sense those movements, and he is going to start a several-day period, a couple-week period of starting to shift his base of operations back down towards Winchester, and then actually withdrawing through Winchester and shifting his base of operations all the way back down to Fisher's Hill. While that's going on, Sheridan is actually going to make some moves that are going to become more famous, very similar to the way he's going to move his army just prior to the Battle of Third Winchester. You can really see him using the crossing points of the Opequon Creek, as well as understanding the roads in the eastern part of this part of the valley, and understanding how the roads over here connect with the Valley Turnpike. And you're going to see him creeping farther south and ever westward, always trying to go south and then turn westward to the Valley Pike. And what he's trying to do, he's trying, even in those first days of August, to get below Early. He's trying to cut Early off. He's trying to use these roads here, as he knows Early's moving on the Valley Turnpike to the west of us. He's trying to use these roads to get past Early and swing around below him and cut him off before he can get further up the valley. Now you got to remember, every step Sheridan takes up the valley, his job gets harder and harder, because his supply line gets longer. He has to leave more troops behind him, so he gets weaker the further he goes up the valley. He also is dealing with the partisan Rangers. Mosby's men are a constant threat to him in his mind. There are a lot, this is very heavily Confederate territory in this part of the valley, not so much over in the Martinsburg area. So this is a dangerous area to be moving in. So if he can stop Early before Early can draw him up into the more narrow part of the valley, that's going to be better for him. His supply lines stay shorter, and he's got a much more secure theater of operations. So that's what he's going to try to do. Now, those of you who are students of the Battle of Third Winchester, which is not part of this tour, that's exactly what he's doing. The plan that Grant approves for him to execute for the Battle of Third Winchester is that same plan that he's using early in August. He's going to move south in this area. He's going to then bend to the west, strike early if he can. But if you remember, Crook's men were not actually originally intended to swing to across Red Bud Run and strike Early from the north. That's because Early and his men had bogged down the Union advance. The original plan at 3rd Winchester was for the Army of West Virginia to swing to the south, of the Berryville Turnpike. Again, very similar thinking to what he's applying here. Now we are moving towards Summit Point. Let's get back to Anderson. In Sheridan's probing that I was just describing, there's going to be a good bit of action. It's not just cavalry action. There are going to be brigade and at times divisions of infantry drawn into this. Now I say division. You've got to remember on the Confederate side, Early has a corps on paper, but his corps is actually division in size. And the divisions that we talk about are actually brigades in size. But there are going to be significant numbers of infantry who are drawn into the fighting in those early sparring days. What's going to happen is Early's actually going to be surprised by the pressure that he feels from Sheridan. And that's an interesting thing to think about because, you know, a lot of the story that we often talk about is that, you know, Sheridan's acting timid and so on. It's really not the case. And that is evidenced by the fact that Early is forced to change his plans. Early will call for Anderson to come over the Blue Ridge and act in concert with him here. And that brings us directly to the battle that will erupt right where we're sitting now. And we're going to pick that story up when we get off the bus.